QSO Today, episode 403, Tracy McKim VE3TWM. My thanks to Icom America for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. I returned to Israel last week from a trip to the United States and the Dayton Hamvention. I have to say that it was a great experience to meet with old friends and to make new ones at both the QRP ARCI 4 Days in May event and the Hamvention itself. It was nice to get out from behind the computer and leave the office to travel. I am now back in Israel, tested positive for COVID-19, and sleeping off cold and flu symptoms. It seems that I'm not alone, as many of the folks that I got to hang out with at Hamvention are also infected. I wish all of you a speedy recovery. Tracy McKim VE3TWM believes in the effectiveness of low-power communications to communicate across town or around the world. Tracy uses his YouTube channel, Outdoors on the Air, to first demonstrate the use of fiberglass poles to install wire antennas, and then to successfully demonstrate outdoor ham radio operation using those full-size antennas to operate QRP single-sideband. VE3TWM is my QSO today. VE3TWM, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Tracy?
4Z1UG, this is VE3TWM. It's a pleasure to make a contact with you today, Eric.
Tracy, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Yes, absolutely. So I was a wee young lad back around 1970. I was about 10 years old, and I didn't have any interest whatsoever in radio. I had a stepbrother that was stationed with the U.S. forces over in Germany, and we didn't see much of him, but one day this giant box appeared on our family doorstep. My dad brought it in and unpacked this one evening, and inside was a Grundig RF260U. This was a very large, I think they called them table radios, but this thing was big. It was in a wooden cabinet. It had two large, probably 6x9 speakers in the top, arranged left and right. And underneath it, there was this scale that showed AM, FM, and something which I'd never heard of before, shortwave bands. So my dad unpacked this, really it was on a mini pallet, unpacked the box on our living room floor, pulled the radio out, put the packing to the side, and we all laid there on our stomachs with this thing plugged into the wall, sitting on the floor. And my dad was tuning through the short wave bands, and I think my jaw was dropping off the floor because we were hearing stations from Colorado that would have been WWV. We were hearing BBC World Service from England. I'm getting chills just thinking about this, Eric. The Deutsche Welle in Germany, all over the world. And from this box, it's like, back then we probably had 4 or 5 television channels. And then, we could get AM broadcast stations and FM broadcast stations from local cities. But to be able to have this box that would bring voices and signals in from all over the world just sparked something in my mind. It just really blew me away. And I think that was the moment when I really got into this whole radio stuff. A year later, after that, I got for Christmas, and this was something that Radio Shack, the chain here in Canada and the U.S., sold. It was called an Archer Space Patrol base station, and this was a plastic box about the size of a shoebox maybe, and it sold for about $30. It wasn't anything sophisticated, but it had an AM broadcast receiver in it and a front panel switch that would switch you over to CB. I had no idea what CB was, but there was a big tuning dial and a variable tuning dial so you could tune up and down the CB band, and there was a telescopic whip that came out of the top, and you plugged in a little microphone into the front panel, and I could hear stations on there talking back and forth, a two-way radio sort of thing. Now, with that, we also, my brother and I, got a couple of walkie-talkies, and we found out that we could communicate using this base station and the walkie-talkies. Now, my brother never got the radio bug, but I sure did, and we ended up, as it turns out, after Christmas, and I had some time to mess with it a little bit more, I found out there were a number of other kids in the neighborhood, blocks and blocks away that I didn't know, that also got these units. So we had our own, we had no idea what it was called at the time, but we had our own CB net on channel 14 after school and into the evening once homework was done. And we would communicate back and forth on these little crystal-controlled channel 14 transmitters. And we, a bunch of us got into this to the point where we even modified these radios, and we added a crystal switch. And a crystal switch was just something we thought it was all fancy at the time. All we did was take two wires into the crystal socket on the circuit board that the channel 14 crystal was plugged into. And we would run those two leads out, drill a hole in the top of the box with a rotary switch and some pigtail type flyers running out, and then I think I had channel 6 and channel 11 and channel 9, and I could just switch between them, and we would just retune the receivers to go and operate. So that was a lot of fun. That was really the genesis of my interest in radio, Eric.
What was the hometown?
Hometown, Burlington, Ontario, which is about 30 miles to the west of Toronto. On the, if anybody knows the Great Lakes, it's on the north shore of Lake Ontario.
In those days, Citizens Band was probably, I remember it in those days, but it hadn't gained its popularity yet. It was still kind of simmering.
Completely correct.
We didn't have Smokey and the Bandit yet.
No, completely correct. In fact, if I remember correctly, there were still a few businesses in the area on certain channels using it for business purposes because it was more of a shared service.
It sounds to me like even with the stock antenna, you were able to communicate many blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. They were 100 milliwatt transmitters on them. We didn't know anything about amplifiers in those days. We did know that it was illegal to run amplifiers, but yes, a remarkable range for Citizens Band in those days. The bands were quieter, and because probably looking back now, I had no knowledge of this at the time, but because the crush, the madness over CB that happened later on in that decade had not yet occurred, skip wasn't really an issue. So you didn't have those days where you just couldn't communicate with somebody a few blocks away because you had somebody from Alabama rolling in and just blowing every other station off the channel.
So it was quite usable. Now, this makes you about 11 years old, I think, and did that lead to an interest in electronics? Did you kind of link this idea of Citizens Band radio with the practice of electronics or the hobby of electronics?
So yes, it absolutely did. Going back to Radio Shack again, because in our town, Radio Shack was the place to go for electronic stuff. There really wasn't anything else back in that time frame. They sold a series of project boxes that had little springs on them, and these springs were attached to discrete electronic components, resistors, capacitors, and the like. And these project boxes came with a manual, basically an instruction book that had a series of different projects that you could wire, because you opened up the box that this thing came in, and there were a bunch of jumper cables, and they were all color-coded as to length. And this would walk you through how to connect the various components together. to build a simple radio, for example, or a PA system or something like that. There were quite a range of different projects you could build. So I messed with one of those for a while, and further to the interest in electronics. Again, Radio Shack, they had a series of books. They had shortwave listening books, and they had CB radio books, and I would get every one I could get my hands on and read it cover to cover. And and by the way, so on that note, my favorite publication in the 1970s, bar none, and I would wait impatiently every year for it, was the release of the new Radio Shack catalog, and that would become my Bible. I mean, I would sitting there eating breakfast all alone at the table, getting ready to go to school. I'd have that catalogs out in front of me, just looking everything, and just dreaming. I had no budget for things. I had a paper route, which was netted me a penny a paper, and I had 100 houses I had to deliver on, and that money didn't last long. But yes, electronics interest followed. I will say this, that it really didn't manifest into anything later on. I guess it sort of did. But through school, I took electricity, and they didn't have electronics in the high school I attended, but they did have electrical courses, and I signed up for all of those.
Was there an amateur radio club or anything like that in the high school?
No. The high school I went to didn't have a ham radio club. There was really no ham radio presence in my life at that point. I'll tell you what, though, I had a couple of friends back in the early high school days, and I got them interested in radio and in CB, and we all decided we were going to try to get our ham licenses. So at the school, but not related to the school, were night classes for amateur radio hosted by the local club, and that was just the school that they picked to have these classes. So I signed up, and two of my friends signed up to take this with me, and they got their ham licenses, but I struggled pretty mightily. I did okay with the theory. I did great with the regulations, but I just couldn't get the code. So they ended up getting their ham licenses. One of them got it at age 13, and I think at the time, from what I remember, he was the youngest licensed amateur in Canada, although I don't think he actually even holds the license anymore. I've looked him up in the past, and I don't see his name come up. But they were good students, and they had no problem. They got their licenses, worked hard, and they ended up being young hams. And I was kind of left behind on the ham radio train at that point.
What did you do after high school? Where did you go?
So high school, I went to a local community college and took an electronics engineering technology course. But being perfectly candid, I wasn't much of a student. My wife thinks I've got ADD, and she may be right. I had a tough time in high school and in college later on. So I didn't actually end up getting my diploma. I dropped out, but at that point, I realized that it's time to get myself moving and doing something for a living. So I ended up going into sales, and one of the first companies that I went to was a company that sold audio systems, stereo systems, we called them back in the day, back in the early 80s, and started on a long career in basically electronic sales, eventually morphing into what I do now, which is in the software sales business. Now, I will add something here, which sort of, I guess, speaks to my own path, is that during my teen years, I mean, I had a lot of internal issues. Now, I didn't end up in trouble, and I never had any trouble with the law, and I didn't have any substance abuse troubles or anything like that. But I was bullied in school. Now, I was a fair-sized kid. I was one of the taller kids always, but I was of a manner that I was not aggressive. I was lacking in self-confidence. Even my first name, for example, this was a great source of amusement for some of the kids at school who took great delight into just pushing me around, I guess. And because I was of the demeanor I was, I didn't stand up to any of that and took it all internally. So for me to move from a place of low confidence into the sales world, where, really you have to become somebody who is engaging, who is outgoing, who is not an introvert. That took some doing, and part of that was due to my taking on the role of becoming a minor baseball coach. Right around the time I started, I guess it was last year of high school, maybe the first year of college. And I was a disaster that first year because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I was going into it with all the right intentions, help young kids and community service and all the rest of it. But my team, out of 20 games, I think we won 3 out of the first 5 games, and then we went winless for the rest of the season. And the parents were on me, and rightfully so. I didn't have a clue. The next, and I could have folded up my tent right there, Eric. In terms of personal development, I was able to find a motivation in that. And so the following winter, I took coaching courses. I picked up books on, coaching techniques for baseball. And I studied and I studied and I studied. The next year, I went back. I said, you know what, I'm not going to leave on that note. My team won 12 out of 20 games. We were very competitive. The kids did really well. They responded great to the coaching. I learned, I developed as a coach. And then the third year, we won 16 games and won the city championship. And it was at that moment, I think, that because I can still remember the feeling when my team won the championship. It was a feeling I have never felt since, a feeling of elation, almost an out-of-body experience, because I had proven to myself that I could do something. And it was that experience, I believe, which led me into being able to have enough confidence to go into the sales game and to break out of my shell and to be able to start talking to people one-on-one, having the confidence to carry on, to believe in things, to learn the lesson of knowing what you need to know, so that you can deliver that effectively to people who need the information, whether it's sales, whether it's coaching, or whether it's like I'm doing now with the YouTube stuff.
I love the story. It's kind of the hero's journey, where you have to battle all of the demons at the very beginning, and then all of a sudden you discover that, in fact, you can battle the demons and you can actually win over them. But you have to have those losses at the beginning to understand what it really means to move forward. Also a wonderful thing from the standpoint that having the door slammed in your face for 6 months makes you start to think that you can do it if you decide you no longer want that door slammed in your face. You'll find the mentor, or you'll find the book, or you'll find the whatever it is.
That's very true. And sometimes the mentors aren't always where you look for them. And I got to say, that's been something over the course of my career that I haven't been particularly fortunate in. And I get that sometimes oftentimes you're the master of your own fortune, good or bad. But mentors are not easy to come by. But when you do find one, hopefully you've got the wisdom at the time to stick with it, even if you don't like what you're hearing, so that you can grow.
And now this message from Icom America. Field Day is coming on June 26th and 27th, and since it is ham radio's most popular event, you can be a Field Day leader with Icom. Connect with nature, connect with friends. You will easily cut through the pileups with a powerful and high-quality Icom base station. The popular Icom IC705 portable, the Icom IC7300, and the Icom IC7610 SDR transceivers are the clear choice for contesters and DXers across the globe. The Icom IC705 is the perfect transceiver for hams who enjoy both the indoors and the great outdoors on field day. It is the perfect contesting companion because this base station provides features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters, and it weighs in at just under 2 pounds. Features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall display, 5 watts with the BP272 battery pack, and 10 watts with a 13.8-volt DC power source. Single-sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functionality. Micro USB connector, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, and micro SD card slot are all standard equipment. Integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger. And the HM243 speaker microphone is standard equipment. The Icom IC705 has new accessories now available. The MBF705 desktop stand for just the right viewing angle on your desk, and the AH705 optional automatic antenna tuner that covers 1.8 MHz to 50 MHz bands with a 30-meter or 100-foot or longer wire antenna. The Icom IC7300 is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing the generated inherent noise in different IF stages. This radio changed the way that entry-level HF transceivers are designed. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen display, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. I have the Icom IC7300, and it is by far the best HF transceiver that I have ever owned. It is always listening to 20-meter CW while I work. The Icom IC7610 is the SDR transceiver that every ham wants. This high-performance SDR has the ability to pick out faint signals in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The Icom IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that has changed the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Features include, but are not limited to, RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receivers, you can be in 2 places at once, and dual digicell. For more information, click on the banner ad in this week's show notes page to get to the Icom America website and its fine line of amazing amateur radios. And when you finally go to buy your next Icom radio, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. You say that now you're in software sales?
Yes, that's correct.
What kind of software are you selling, and what kind of audience is it?
Yeah, good question. So I started a new role with a company new to me back at the beginning of the year. We're selling into the architectural, engineering, and construction industries. That's my team's role, primarily Autodesk. But we also sell Bluebeam and a number of other related software products into, and in my role in particular, architectural firms. So this is, and you know, there's a lot that you can say about trying something new, Eric. I'm sure you're aware of this. This is not a market that I have been in the past, because in the past I have been more of a general focused into the enterprise, let's say 500 and up users. So the fact that I get, and believe me, they put me through a lot of training the first 3 months of this year, learning about the business of architecture and engineering and construction, and how there's this big chain, but it's all very specialized, and how these disciplines all have to work together, and the tools that they use can really help them save time, be more competitive on bidding. and produce better work with less waste. It's a fascinating thing, and in particular, when I look back and think my father was in the construction industry for many years, and I never really understood it, never really got into it, but now that I've been looking into it a bit more, I have a much better idea of what he did from day to day. And holy cow, there's a lot of challenges in the construction industry that I think a lot of people are completely, they have no visibility into. And it sounds like a really stressful environment. So, and that's one of the things I love about sales too, Eric. You know, salespeople have a bad reputation. I think generally, people tend to think of the used car guy, I guess, and that's probably doing a disservice to the used car guys. But what I love about what I do is that I get to help people. You know, they're in a situation, they know they need help. If you can be the person that shows up on a call and says, "Hey, listen, I see. Okay, ask a bunch of questions. Don't presume anything, but ask a bunch of questions." Figure out where they're having their issue, and then find a fit of something that you can offer them that's going to save them grief and help them move ahead in their careers. That's the key. That's the key to sales. I don't look at customers as customers. I look at customers as anytime I talk to somebody I haven't talked to before, here's an opportunity to make a new friend. That's what I want at the end of the day. I want to build a trusting relationship so that somebody says, "Hey, you know what? I can call Tracy and I can ask him a question or two. He's going to give me some information that's going to help me. He's not going to push anything on me simply because there's a spiff associated with it during this quarter." And that's my whole strategy. And that actually translates over into what I do on YouTube, because I think every time somebody watches one of my videos, and if they're kind enough to leave a comment for me or send me an email afterwards, I've just made a new friend. And to me, what could be more positive about the exercise than something like that?
Well, I think there's nothing like it, frankly. I mean, that's the way I sell, too. I'm a solution salesman. Now, I'm also technical, so I guess I can get under the hood as well. But in your market with Autodesk, I mean, I'm familiar with Autodesk and its products. What's nice about that is that that's a yearly license for each of those simultaneous users or concurrent users. So the cash flow is good on the product. And the value of that product is hundreds of times more than the cost of it. If you're building a skyscraper, you're counting every screw now. And the fact is, these products that you sell, you can actually count every screw.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, there's having had no knowledge of this before I started at the beginning of the year, when I saw the capabilities of the product, my mind was blown. I'd never imagined. I mean, this is using. It's so funny. I've got this thought about computers after having sold them and used them for so many years that technology is just becoming overwhelming and really overbearing. And my God, is it worth all the extra stress that goes along with implementing technology and then just dealing with it day to day? But when you see the capability that's built into some of this software, and you just alluded to it, the ability to take some technical drawings and have the software pull out an extremely detailed list of all of the component materials, that is hugely powerful, isn't it?
Intel is building 5 office towers next to the building that I'm working in. I'm working in the Cisco building in Jerusalem. And I'm watching this building go up. And you know that they've used AutoCAD or something like that, because the way each floor goes up, then you start seeing the air conditioning equipment coming in even before they put the sides on the building. And it's like exactly the same, floor after floor after floor. So you know that they've modeled this building right down to the last screw. And it's a fascinating thing to watch when you actually meet an architect that actually does this and they've mastered your tool. And this is probably the wonder that you have when you meet someone who's actually, they've mastered the tool that you're selling, and they know it so well that they can build a building like this, or whatever it is that they're building, a car, anything. I'm always dumbfounded when I meet somebody who is just an amazing expert at the one thing they do really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I often consider myself, I think it's a privilege. And many times over the course of my career, I've gotten on a conference call and I'm the resource they're looking to for answers. And I know I'm the dumbest guy on the call. I just happen to know something that they don't. And that's a really cool feeling unto itself, where you can be with these people who are incredibly impressive and say, hey, I've got something I hear that can help you. To me, that's a very rewarding part of the job.
The downside, Tracy, I think, is being a generalist means that I'm trying to use my computer for 1,000 different things, none of them extremely well, but enough that I can find myself all the way around. And that's when I start to wish I was that single hot knife in the butter that's actually doing the real brain work. Well, what can I tell you? That's not me, but you know what? I guess in the sales business, you provide a different kind of value as a generalist, perhaps.
It's funny you should mention that, Eric, because yes, I have thought the same sorts of things over the course of my career. And as I'm, during my training the past few months, as I'm taking a look at some of these technological marvels that people have built, I've found myself saying the very same thing, like, wow, maybe with a few different life choice decisions, I could have been somebody doing that rather than doing what I'm doing now. But, it takes all kinds, and maybe that's something we will save for the next lifetime.
Or maybe that's what we do in retirement. We finally choose that one thing that we would really like to do well and exclude everything else. Now let's go back to amateur radio. So when did you come back in, Tracy?
I came back in, a really good friend of mine, Randy VE3OZR. I've known Randy since kindergarten. I hadn't kept in touch with him through the 80s. That was my 20s. But later in the decade, we reconnected, and we remain very close friends to this day and see each other often, go on camping trips, etc. Randy got his ham license back in around 1986 or 87, and while we were out of contact. And when we reached out to him, and I said, Rand, do you want to get back together in terms of spending some time together? Because I haven't seen you in years. It'd be great to catch up. And he'd mentioned this to me, and it's like I was blown away. Not only was I blown away, but I was thinking, oh, geez, here's another fellow that I got interested in radio. He went out and got his license before I did. Here I am. I haven't done anything radio wise, and it's along that path, Eric. The beginning of the 80s, I still had this idea in my mind that I was going to get my ham license, and knowing that the code was the big stickler for me, I had heard that some people were using computers to teach themselves the code, and I thought, well, that's a cool thing. Maybe I'll get a small computer to teach myself the code. And that was a bad mistake from a getting the ham radio license quickly perspective, because I got neck deep into computers at that point and forgot all about radio. And it wasn't until I reached out to Randy, and Randy mentioned this, that, okay, time to get back into it. So I ended up getting my license a few years later in 1991. I was 30 years old. And at that point, the government here in Canada had reduced the code entry to 5 words per minute. So I figured, well, surely to heavens I can get 5 words per minute. I bought an audio training course called Code Quick, which used sound-alike words for letters. So in other words, it was let me see, A was every letter that had a matching word, and let me see here. Oh yeah, B was band rat-a-tat. So band being longer, and then rat-a-tat was 3. So da-da-da-dit was the sound alike for the letter B, and all the way through the alphabet. Anyway, I used that. I went in and got, no problem with the theory, no problem with the regulations, and then squeaked through 5 words per minute. And then there it was in 1991, and I was extremely fortunate. No need for a vanity call here, because I got my initials. VE3TWM. And that was, so I had no interest in getting a vanity call or a shorter call or anything else. I've got the one that was built for me. So that's when I got it. And Randy and I started getting a little bit more into radio in the 90s.
What was the license class in Canada? Do they have the same technician general?
No, it's a bit different here, Eric. The one I ended up getting was basic with Morse code. So you get your basic, which would give you, and I'm stretching the brain cells a little bit here. It's been a while since I've looked into it. The basic, I believe, gave you VHF and UHF privileges. Basic VHF, UHF, all mode privileges. When you got the Morse code, when I got it, you got HF rights in addition to that for and all modes for 10 meters and 160 and 80 meters, I think it was. Then if you got up to 13 words per minute, then you could get full HF privileges. And then they have an advanced. And the advanced gives the ability to use an amplifier, to have a repeater, to actually work on your transmitters, with a soldering iron. And none of those things are things that I'm interested in. If you've ever seen me use a soldering iron, you would understand why I'm not interested in that. But I don't want a repeater. I'm a firm believer in the power of low. I should rephrase that. A firm believer in the effectiveness of low power communications. In the vast majority of instances, I don't think people need 1,500 watts. So I'll never have an amplifier. So I currently hold, even though I've done a lot of ham radio related activities, I currently hold the basic plus 5 words per minute. I've never moved beyond that, but they did grandfather some years later, so the people with basic and 5 words code could access the entire HF spectrum.
What seems so interesting is that they're using the Morse code speed requirement as a way to give you additional access to the bands without requiring even any more technical understanding.
So, yeah, no, it's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point, and who knows why they make the decisions they do.
Well, you know what? Perhaps there was somebody that convinced them that was the right way to do that. If maybe the persons deciding what the privileges are were not hams themselves, or not even maybe technical, or maybe couldn't even pass the exam if they took the exam themselves.
And certainly, I think as time went on, I think you're right. I think back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you probably had examiners who knew the stuff cold. And then as things changed within the government,
that expertise changed.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. So here you are, you're now an active ham, and you just mentioned your YouTube channel. So let's talk about your YouTube channel a little bit. What is the subject of your YouTube channel?
So my YouTube channel is named Outdoors on the Air. And the reason I chose that is there are a couple of reasons. So I started with the channel. I started making videos in 2011. And this all came about because I started looking towards YouTube for and back in the 90s, in the 2000s, I was a voracious reader of CQ magazine, QST magazine, 73 magazine, everything I could get. And when I found that YouTube had some ham radio oriented material back around 2010ish, I started watching those. Now, it certainly wasn't to the level of saturation, the ham stuff on YouTube that it is today. It was kind of few and far between. But I was really enjoying some of the ones I was coming across. And I started to think that, maybe I could offer something back to the ham radio community. And it wasn't in terms, I wasn't even thinking long term. I was thinking maybe I could put out a video or two about something I know. And as I reflect back on that time and my intentions, some stuff became clear to me. The first one, I can remember, I was getting some positive feedback at work in terms of presentations I was giving. So I figured, well, if I could, if people seem to like what I'm doing presenting, maybe I could do this. the other thing that came to my mind is I'm thinking, well, what can I possibly talk? I don't know anything that everybody else doesn't already know. So the one thing I could think of that was something that I hadn't seen addressed in YouTube, and that was the use of telescopic fiberglass poles as antenna supports. I knew that people were using them. You know, there was a company out of the Carolinas called Jackite that was selling a 31-foot extension pole. And so I ordered one. I had ordered one of those because I was living in a house where I had a tower, but I wanted to put a wire antenna, a 40-meter antenna, EndFed, up on the tower with the other end stretching out to the back corner of my yard, which wasn't a very deep yard. So I figured if I got one of those poles, I could put it up in the back corner of the yard, attach it to the chain link fence back there, and that would give me sort of a semi-permanent installation for the far end of my 66-foot EndFed wire. So I did that, and it stayed up for a couple of years. It worked pretty well. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to make my first video about telescopic poles as antenna supports. And it blew me away what happened with that. It was, let me tell you, Eric, it was a hack job. It was the first video I had done. I'm not talking loudly enough. I'm shooting it outside in the backyard. I was stumbling on my words, but I guess the message got out. And to this point, there's been more than 100,000 views on that video. And I don't say that because I'm bragging. I'm saying that out of sheer astonishment. And I think it taught me something. It taught me that, you know what? You do know things other people don't know. And I would like to pass that message along to anybody else out there who's listening, who might think that, everybody already knows the stuff that I know. It doesn't matter who you are, what path you've taken. You may be somebody who considers him or herself to not have much in the way of general knowledge, but I guarantee you there's something you know that nobody else out in the crowd knows. And this is just because we've all taken different paths, learned different things at different points to overcome different challenges. So this is where my channel got to start. As soon as I saw the numbers of views that were going into this one, I decided I was going to start. Okay, well, what else can I offer? Is there something else that I can offer unique? And I released some videos over the next few years that I've since pulled down off the channel. They're not visible there anymore because they were early. They were hack jobs. There was some decent information in them, but they were too painful for me to watch. And all of a sudden, video editing became something that I was intrigued by. I wanted to produce something. And this, by the way, this sort of harkens back to when I was, I didn't mention this earlier, but when I was 12 years old, I used to spend hours. My parents got me a little compact cassette recorder, and I used to spend hours pretending I was a radio announcer with the recorder going and a newspaper in front of me, reading out news items. And it's sort of, so I kind of had this, I don't think that's ever left me, the ability to want to communicate things. So this all gave me, this whole platform gave me an opportunity to kind of relive that thinking from my youth. And while all this is going on, I was getting back into camping. I hadn't been camping since I was in my 20s. I was in it with a very active Boy Scout and after Boy Scouts venture troop. We had some incredible leaders that gave a lot to us. There's a debt of gratitude there for those men that could never be repaid. They used to drag us into the backcountry on hikes, on canoe trips, weekend trips, sometimes even longer. And that really bred an interest in the great outdoors for me and in roughing it, camping, whether front country, car camping, or backcountry. And I saw the opportunity to meld these two loves of mine together, camping and ham radio. And so I came up with the name Outdoors on the Air because I had actually envisioned at the time I I launched it, that, I could even stretch out to do camping only videos. It didn't have anything to do with radio. That hasn't panned out for a number of reasons. I've got a lot of demands on my time personally that don't allow me to do more than I'm doing currently. And there's plenty of stuff on the ham radio side, but it became my mission statement with this channel to, I'm not here to say, hey, look at everything I know. It's more about people, take a look at what I'm doing. You can do this. And if you choose to do this, it's a lot of fun. You'll learn an awful lot, and you'll come away richer for the experiences. And that was really what my channel, the idea that my channel has grown into, all about encouraging people. Get out of the shack, get outdoors, and get on the air. That's my channel's motto, and that's what I want to do.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. Now, would you say that your YouTube channel, in terms of getting out in the outdoors and operating, do you have an emphasis for you that could be done out of the back of your station wagon into the tent? Or do you have an emphasis on snowshoeing into the campground and setting the whole thing up and then setting the radios up? Do you have a particular emphasis, or do you have a particular person in mind, a particular ham in mind that you think about when you're creating a video?
The people I think I'm targeting more than anybody else are the people that aren't doing it currently, or the people that have dabbled in it and haven't really taken it to the next level. Now, so take Parks on the Air, for example. Parks on the Air is, as I know you're aware, and probably everybody else, it's a phenomenon. It's a ham radio phenomenon. And I was doing this camping stuff before Parks on the Air really took off. There's a lot of guys who will take their cars. They've got an HF set up in their car, and they'll drive into a parking lot of a park, and they'll operate like that. And I'm not throwing any shade on those guys and or ladies. That's great. That's fine. You're promoting the hobby. You're really helping people get interested in the program. And I love what they do, but that's not what I do. I'm not going to diss them. That's not what I do. What I do is I go out and I set up a station. I want to sit on a picnic table, or I want to set up a shelter, or I want to go into the backcountry, canoe into the backcountry, backpack into the backcountry, and set up a station there. When I do that, that's more my style. It's like Parks on the Air is fun. You can go out for 2 or 3 hours. You can operate. You can tear it down. If you're not inside the car, inside the car, you don't have to tear anything down. And then you can go home. I'm more of a longer term. I really enjoy going out, the entire experience. You go out, you set up your shelter, you set up, if you're camping, you're setting up your tent, your sleeping tent. You're setting up a bug shelter or a sun shelter or a rain shelter to operate under, so you're there. You set up a temporary antenna, and one of the things that I have come to appreciate, to understand fully, is that when I go out, I want to use a full-sized antenna, something somebody would use at their home. We're not talking about Yagis with towers and rotors here, but we are talking about full-size wire antennas, because those type of antennas put up high and in the clear will result in success. If you go out with a low-to-the-ground antenna like like a magnetic resonant loop antenna, these low to the ground compromise antennas, you're going to make a few contacts, but you may not. And there's an old saying, and this is one of my pet peeves about ham radio, is hey, if I can hear them, I can work them. Well, that may be true if you're using a compromised low to the ground antenna, but you're not hearing everybody you could be communicating with because your antenna is a compromised antenna. So yes, to summarize the answer to your question, I like to get out there. I like to get out of the car. And maybe I can inspire some of these people who are using their cars and making some contacts while they're doing it to try taking it to the next level and getting out, setting up a good antenna, and then just seeing how much better they could do with an antenna like that.
Can you make contacts using single sideband while operating QRP?
100% yes. So here's the thing you need to know. I alluded to my adversarial relationship with the code earlier. I don't do code, and it's not because I hate code, and I have plenty of respect for people who do the code. But I don't do code. Everything I do is single sideband. Excuse me. Back in 2019, Eric, I was camping out on a rainy, cold weekend, the CQ Worldwide single sideband contest. The bands are jammed from one end to the other. I'm out there with my Yaesu FT817, no amplifier. And I made contacts throughout the United States, into the Caribbean, South America, into Europe and Africa, all on 5 watts. And 2019, this is when people were complaining, the bands are garbage, the sunspots are way down, the conditions are terrible. And I'm not talking about QRP operators, I'm talking about regular operators who are doing this sort of thing, who are on the HF bands. Here I was, against the odds, making a boatload of contacts in difficult conditions with QRP and single sideband.
It seems to me that a lot of outdoor operators that I watch on YouTube, and I see a fair number, they like EndFed antennas rather than simple dipole antennas. Why do you think that is?
For me, the answer is very straightforward, and I want to sort of give you a bit of background. So I had never used an EndFed antenna, but I have a situation at home where I've got a lot of tall trees in the back, and I really haven't got the ability to put up a dipole or something. I've got a short front yard. I've got neighbors who watch for things like a hawk, so that I have to be very careful and stealthy about what I put up. So I actually started, I've been in a few homes over the past 20 years. I started with an EndFed back probably the early 2000s, a company by the name of PAR, and I bought a 40-meter EndFed, and that worked fabulously for me. I mean, it worked really, really well. And what was nice about it is I could put the high end up on the tower, and then the low end went out to the back to the telescopic pole I was referring to earlier. When I started going out portable, I bought a product from the high end company in Holland. There's a guy by the name of Ron out there who's just a true gentleman. It makes a great product, and the beauty of these antennas now, and we have to actually. I should step back for just a moment. So as we talk about EndFeds, there's a couple of variations of these. One of them is a random wire EndFed, where you have to run a counterpoise in addition to the wire itself. And the other one is a resonant antenna, which uses a matching unit that will allow the use on multiple bands without the use of a tuner. So the high-end company makes that kind. They don't require the wired counterpoise to be run along the ground. The beauty of these EndFeds is that you really, to have an effective antenna, you only need to support one end of the antenna. The other one can come down to the ground. And that makes it different from a dipole, where you support the center, and then you need supports at the ends. Of course, with the idea trying to keep the ends of the dipole up high off the ground. So deployment is so simple and fast with an EndFed, and the performance is actually really good.
You made a presentation at the last QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo called HF Portable Answering the Call. What call were you answering?
The Call of the Wild. So it was a takeoff on the Jack London book. The idea being that, if you're in your basement shack and, you got those four walls around you, that's ham radio to you. And that's certainly one major facet of the ham radio experience. But if you answer that call and you go out into the wild, whether it's camping at a provincial park, whether it's out into the back country, whether it's just a couple of hours of parks on the air, you're going to encounter things which are going to stretch your knowledge of ham radio. Because it's one thing to set up a permanent station and understand all the limitations and things you need to work within the restraints of that particular deployment. But every time you go out and operate portable, things are different. The weather is different. The temperature is different. Are there bugs? Are there no bugs? What time of year is it? What are the conditions like? What type of antenna will work under a given set of conditions, i.e. propagation? Which bands do you have to be more strategic in terms of bands? Is there an event running that will require you to change any of the physical attributes of your station? So that's the call I was referring to.
It seems to me that we're more concerned these days when we go out into the wild, getting bitten by ticks and getting Lyme disease. Since most, apparently 50% of Lyme disease cases go undiscovered, they go undiagnosed. How do you mitigate ticks when you go out in the field?
Oh, I tell you, that is a very timely question, a very important one. I always wear long pants. You won't catch me. I don't care how hot it is out. I'm not going to wear shorts. In addition to that, when I set up a station, I'm going to use a table. Whether it's a picnic table, whether it's a folding table I bring along. I will also lay out a tarp underneath that table so that, my feet are not on grass or dirt or whatever the rest of it is. I protect myself that way. Of course, you better take a pair of tweezers with you just in case you do come across something. Visual inspection is important. You can pull your socks, not very fashionable, but you can pull your socks up over the end of your pant legs. Where I like to wear taller boots, like hiking boots, when I'm out there. And of course, I'm going to if I'm putting my antenna up across a field of brush, as I have had to do in the past. So you've got waist high weeds and other stuff growing as you're making your way across to the tree. Then long sleeves. That's. I know there's stuff you can spray on your clothes. I don't use it. I haven't used it to this point, but so far so good.
And for those of us who seem to have a northerny genetic disposition, long sleeves is good anyway in the sun.
Yeah, 100%. I burn very easily. Yeah.
It's the pay now, not pay later, or play now and pay later. Some of us are in the play now, pay later stages of our lives, so I'm always in long sleeves now. Okay, well, that's good to know. And if you find a tick, you pick it off. I haven't seen ticks in years, but I know they're here.
To the best of my knowledge, I've never had a tick, but take a pair of tweezers along. The most good first aid kits will have a pair of tweezers. So you can't just scrape it off with your fingernail, unfortunately, because I think you leave part of the bug behind. But you do need a pair of tweezers to get them out. And
a first aid kit is worth having when you're out in the wild.
100%. Yes. You never know what's going to happen. You just never know. I tend to move picnic tables when I get to a campsite because I'm trying to figure out, okay, where's my pole going to go and where's my tent going to go? If you just grab a picnic table with your bare hands and start dragging it around, you could end up with 4 or 5 slivers without even thinking about it, right? And that's just one of the examples of things that can happen to you. If you're going to have a campfire, you're going to want to have something for burns just in case. You can always tell yourself you're going to be careful, but better to be prepared.
Certainly there are a number of people that like to operate out in the wild alone. Are you one of those, or do you like a buddy system where there's always someone to rely on in case you get hurt or injured?
Trick question, because I love to be alone. That's not to say I don't like it when people come along. I often take my brother on my camping trips, and he's great to spend time with, but there is something about being alone. I went up to a provincial park last October and set up a station there, and I was having trouble with serious trouble with the antenna deployment. And I had driven 4.5 hours to get there. I was bound and determined. It was pouring rain out. It was cold. Hadn't slept well the night before in the tent. And I was considering pulling the plug on the deployment, but I just, it gave me a chance to sit there. If I had had somebody with me, Eric, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because I was alone, I was forced to sit down, take a moment, and realize, listen, I didn't come here to give up. I'm going to push through. I'm going to figure this out. So I figured it out and went on to have a Parks on the Air activation and netted 107 contacts. So it all worked out. That's the kind of experience that I look for when I go out by myself. I've done it a number of times. To be able to handle a challenge by yourself and work through it is extremely rewarding. Mind you, it's the flip side of that is you go with people and you enjoy their company, and it becomes special in a different way.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. What's the current rig?
I have 3 rigs that I will take HF portable and switch between them. I have a Yaesu FT891. That's the newest addition to my collection. I have a Yaesu FT897D, and I have a Yaesu FT817ND. Of the 3, my favorite, hands down, is the 817ND.
Why is that?
The 817ND is a QRP rig. It puts out a maximum of 5 watts. But it is tiny. It is small. It's about the size of a paperback book. It does all bands from 160 to 70 centimeters. It runs forever on a decent-sized battery. It's a rig that when you use it, it forces you to make good antenna decisions. And when you do that, that rig will work miracles. People diss QRP, but after having taken the plunge and bought a QRP rig and used it extensively in the field, I'm still in awe of what that rig can do.
And do you use these rigs also as your home rigs?
No, not typically. I have currently an FT991A that I picked up recently. I actually sold a beautiful Icom IC7410, a rig most people have never heard of and is probably the most under-heralded rig ever, to buy this 991A. And I bought it with the, even though that I really love the 7410, I bought the 991A with an eye towards taking it portable. I haven't seen anybody on YouTube taking the 991A portable. I wanted to learn more about it in terms of its current consumption. And so that's an upcoming project for me to try going forward. But that's my current base rig.
And what are the base antennas? I saw a picture on your QRZ page of something that, a wire antenna. It wasn't a hex beam because it wasn't a beam, but it was in the trees. What antenna was that?
That antenna was a 0.5, 40 through 10 meter ground plane. I don't know, Herrick, if you remember back in the CB days, but you could buy an antenna called a ground plane, and it was a very simple antenna. This is an HF version, multiple band HF version. It's designed to be used with a tuner. It's got, I believe, a 27-foot vertical with a number of 9-foot, 9-foot horizontal radials at the base. That antenna worked really, really well. I have since pulled that antenna down and sold it, not because it wasn't a great performer, because it was, but because we've got a very small backyard. My wife is, she sees everything. And out of respect for her, I bought the antenna, I tested it, it worked really well. I made a video on it, and so I pulled it down because it was a bit of an eyesore to her, even though I had spray painted it black to fit in with all the trees in the back. And so now I'm using I pulled that down, sold it. Now I'm using a high EndFed 8-band, which has got some crazy angles in it, not really at all a perfect deployment, but it works okay for near vertical incident skywave on 80 and 40, which is really what I bought it for.
And what antennas will you use in the field? You mentioned the EndFed. Are there other antennas that you'll take to the field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got some dipoles made by Tim, N9SAB, out of Illinois. And Tim makes a very rugged product. I've got a mini Windham from 40 to 10 that I'll use quite a bit. Excuse me. I've got some off-center fed dipoles also from Tim, 80 through 10, 40 through 10, and then some linked dipoles, 40 through 20. And I've got another one here I haven't tried yet, which is 20, 17, and 15 linked dipole that I hope to be getting up later this year.
What do you think the greatest challenge facing amateur radio is now?
I put some thought into this question. So the first thing and the most important thing is, and for some reason I thought this would go away over time, but it hasn't. And that is spectrum grabs by other services. We are nothing without our spectrum of radio frequency privileges. And if a big bidder comes along and buys up some of those, I think that is a huge threat. And it's not going away. I even on the shortwave bands, the HF bands, I still think there's outfits out there that would covet some of the stuff we have, and so that's a major concern. The other thing that is, and I know this is true in Canada, Eric. I don't know what it's like in Israel or other parts of the world, but this is recent news that is really concerning, and that is the real estate prices here. They have skyrocketed all across the country, and it's becoming almost impossible for young people to buy a decent-sized property with house. And when I say decent-sized, I mean, I'm even talking about a house that I live in, which is a pretty small lot. Now, how does that relate to ham radio? Well, traditionally, ham radio has been, you get your license, you can set up a home station, and you can work the world. Well, if people can't afford anything but one of these common area townhouses or an apartment condo, is a small one, how are people going to do that? And to me, that kind of becomes another challenge, which is more recent in nature, which is potentially more damaging. Why would somebody want to go and put in all the effort to get their license if they really can't have a decent station at home? So to me, those are the two big ones.
Oh, that's very interesting. What do you think of the argument that our young people, the generation of our children, and maybe not grandchildren yet, but for some of the listeners, maybe grandchildren, have a more portable lifestyle? And so therefore owning property means that it ties them down. It doesn't make them as flexible as renting property. And so therefore maybe this outdoor idea, this portable operation, SOTA and POTA, maybe those are things that would appeal more to younger people now than having the fixed station.
That's an interesting perspective, but it involves people who are outward bound. who are comfortable with an outdoor lifestyle. I'm not sure that the vast majority of young people are really into that, at least in my area. There's an awful lot of people that kind of hang around, and maybe they go to the coffee shop.
I'm not saying, Tracy, that they're outdoorsy, but that they're portable. You know, they're gypsy-ish in terms of if there's an opportunity in another city, then owning property, owning a house. I mean, we grew up in a generation where owning a house that's what you strived for. You went to college, you got the job, you got the mortgage, and you bought the house. And it appears, anyway, my children are like this, is that they don't want that. They don't want our stuff when we die. They're not into having a lot of stuff. They're interested in maybe the freedom associated with not having stuff.
That's an interesting perspective, Eric. Honestly, I haven't given that a whole lot of thought, but I like the way you think.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio?
I got a few items on this list here. First of all, the sheer variety of operating interests. You know, it doesn't matter what kind of personality you are. You're going to find something under the umbrella of ham radio that you find intriguing. And this is really cool, not just from the perspective of somebody who's new to ham radio, but somebody who's been in it for years. You get tired and burned out of one thing, well, take a look at what some of the other guys are doing, and you'll find something that's kind of intriguing. Let's go see what that's all about. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Excuse me. The other thing that comes to mind is the affordability of gear. You know, it's probably never been less expensive to get into the hobby of amateur radio and do it reasonably well. So, you know, that opens up a lot of doors for folks who don't have deep pockets or deep wallets. And for me personally, the increased interest in HF portable operation, you know, because this is something that I've been banging the drum on for a while, and to see people moving to parks on the air in droves like they have, it's all about, you know, energizing ham radio. You know, if I take a look back to, you know, what I thought ham radio was 20 years ago, and I look today, it seems like we've had a real jolt of energy that wasn't there. And now all of a sudden, I don't think people are talking nearly as much about the death of ham radio, worried about, you know, the older guard passing away and nobody left to take their place. I see in my own town here, you know, lots of new hams. They're not young hams, but they're folks who are a little bit older who are getting into it. And a lot of them are into parks on the air. That's one of the things that's really driving their interest. So to me, those are the things that excite me about ham radio now.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Okay. First up, join your national association to help protect our spectrum resources. They're the most important thing we have going. I know that in some national organizations, there's talk about politics and people don't agree with moves they're making and all the rest of it. But it does seem to me that the best way to protect our spectrum is to have strong national organizations. So join your national organization. Keep in touch with what's going on for sure. But that's helping all of us protect what we have. Next thing that I was thinking about here is join your local club if they're encouraging and active. And I know sadly there's a lot of clubs that aren't. In my own city, for example, in years gone by, it wasn't a very active and encouraging club, but my club has really undergone a transformation in recent years. To the point where they're actually signing up new members from right across our province, not just from within the city, because they're doing so much. And a lot of people who are driving those types of activities are the newer hams. So if an organization runs itself in such a way that they encourage the participation of newer hams and are welcome to their energy and ideas, then that's going to produce a club that newer hams can get the most out of, and really help that love of ham radio blossom. The next thing that I would say is you don't need the latest and greatest gear to have fun in ham radio. You really, really don't. I just told you about some of my rigs. A couple of them are more than 20 years old. This is not new technology, and there's some great deals on the used market as people upgrade to the latest and greatest. So you don't have to start there. The beautiful part about our hobby is that, you don't even have to spend a ton of money on an antenna, on a good antenna, to do what you need to do. So these are, that's a big one for me. And further to that, put your focus on your antennas. And if we can just go back a minute, Eric, to let me talk to you about when I was selling stereo systems. I've got this analogy, and the analogy is that I would try very hard. Somebody would come into the shop, and they had $1,000 to spend on a stereo system. And I would talk to them about the receivers, and I would talk to them about the speakers and the turntable and the tape decks. And I would say, hey, listen, here's the deal. Take a certain percentage of that money, bigger than you're probably thinking about, and put it towards the speakers. Because ultimately, the speakers are going to determine the quality of sound that you're going to be getting. And that sound is everything. That's what you're really paying for. And then invariably, they would walk over to the receivers, and they'd look at the big, shiny, blinking lights, and they'd spend more money on the receiver than they needed to, less money on the speakers, and they'd walk out after spending their $1,000 on a system that had this beautiful centerpiece for their living room with speakers that sounded more like tin cans on a string. So that when I draw that analogy to ham radio, what I'm saying is don't put all of your emphasis and focus on the rig you're going to be using. Put a good amount of thought into the antenna. Don't put a beautiful rig with a compromised antenna. Put up the best antenna you can, and maybe cut back. And then that's the beautiful part about our hobby, actually, is that you don't need to spend a ton of money on a good antenna, but just put enough thought into it that the antenna that goes up is going to be doing a great service for that rig that you've purchased.
Well, all of that, Tracy, is amazing advice, and I'm so glad that you actually spent some time thinking about the answers to these questions, because I think they're nice and full. I, too, agree that our national associations primarily exist now, I think, for spectrum defense. And I think that we have a lot to defend. We have the worldwide national park, the national park in the ether that we are the rangers of or the curators of. So I guess we need to protect that in order to continue to have that in the future. I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast, Tracy. It was a really fun hour. I hope to work you again.
Eric, thank you very much for the opportunity. I truly appreciate it. I'm really grateful, and I'd like to wish you all the success going forward with this terrific podcast that you've got. It's a real gem in the world of ham radio, and I'm loving listening to every episode.
Thank you so much. 73. That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Tracy. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in VE3TWM in the search box at the top of the page. Be sure to click on the Expo menu item at the top of the page for updates of the upcoming QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo. I'm updating it as I have more information. My thanks to Icom America for their continuing support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of Icom America by clicking on their link in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this episode or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor, monthly or annually, by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. Please note that your contributions are now listed on the show notes page under the Icom banner. This list does not show Buy Me a Coffee contributions. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It will make a big difference as we now embark on getting to episode 500. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, and in the iTunes Store, and now a host of podcast services and applications. We are Podcasting 2.0 compatible, and my podcast player of choice is now Fountain. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who, as the consummate sound artist, makes this host and his guests always sound brilliant. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.